Take Care of Your Body by Rye with your host, Rylan Rosano. Keeping the momentum this week, mental health is a priority. There is no age discrimination. Just remember, you are never alone. Stay tuned in to see what's next.
Today, I'm with Claire from a Florida university. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Rylan. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm happy to have you. Thank you.
So I can go ahead and first kind of introduce myself to give a bit of background. So I am a fourth year finishing up my degrees in biology and Japanese, and I kind of juggle a lot of things on my plate. So I'm on the pre-vet track. I'll be heading to veterinary school in the fall, so that's really exciting. And so I just finished my application cycle. And on top of that, I kind of juggle a lot of different roles. So on top of being a student, I'm also a resident assistant. I'm a teaching assistant. I volunteer, involved in clubs. So a lot of things. And I can definitely kind of empathize with all of those high schoolers and college students out there who are handling a lot.
So you're a girl boss, basically. To some
You could say that.
So I do have a few questions for you just to kind of give some advice to maybe like some of the listeners today. So like you kind of just touched on, you are a college student and you do a lot of different stuff. So I know you've been applying for your post-secondary degree, and I know picking schools and interviewing with schools can be extremely challenging while carrying a course load and all of those other things that you're doing, which are incredible, by the way. How did you handle this?
So a bit of background on the vet school cycle just to understand it a bit better. It opens in January and then it closes in mid-September or so. And so there's not a lot of overlap between kind of when it's due and school. So I started working on it after I finished up my study abroad program in July or so. And I worked on it from like July until mid-September. And so thankfully I didn't have a lot of time where I was taking classes and working on my application. However, I think what I did struggle even more with was kind of the anticipation and waiting to hear back about my application. So once I hit submit in that early September, I was just working on my classes to finish up my degree and just waiting.
Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of the biggest hurdle I had to tackle, was that kind of imposter syndrome and doubt that kept coming back while I was waiting to hear about interviews. And then once I did hear about interviews and I did the interviews, waiting now for decisions.
And while you were waiting, did you experience like any anxiety or any of that like urge to know right away? And did it like disrupt anything in your normal life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned kind of the imposter syndrome and doubt. And I think a lot of that came from comparison. And so, I have all of these experiences, these veterinary hours, I have these extracurriculars, these roles I've been in, but there's the constant doubt of like, was that enough? Should I have done more? Was there something more I could have added to my application? And so I think that anxiety definitely played a huge role in my experience throughout the cycle.
Yeah, I understand. So how did you manage stress during that time and like your self-care regimen? Because that definitely sounds hectic. And I think from an academic standpoint and a personal standpoint. So what did you do to kind of manage all of those anxieties?
Yeah, so I definitely felt overwhelmed a lot. I think that's the best word to describe it. I did end up, so last year before I started the vet school cycle, I had all of the roles kind of on my plate that I mentioned, and I never quite had that much to tackle before. And so I did reach out to the counseling center here on campus and got in touch with a therapist and helped kind of develop strategies for managing all of that. And so she was actually the one who helped me narrow down my feelings to identifying them as just being overwhelmed. And so that's the best word I think that I found to describe it, and feeling like you're being tugged in like 20 different directions. And I got to the point where I just didn't even want to start with one task because there was just so much that I had to do. And so I think one of the biggest methods that I found was kind of doing a brain dump of all of the things that were like bothering me, all the things that I had to do in that moment on just like a whiteboard. So I just write out like all the tasks, all of the things that were on my mind. And then I'd organize them by like urgency. So if I had an assignment due tomorrow or some other responsibility that was more immediate, I put that in like the high priority column. And then I had like a medium and low priority column. And I guess this might be specific to my very like organized personality, but I'm sure a lot of people out there can relate to it. And so that really helped me kind of ground myself and gain a sense of stability again and be able to actually start tackling those tasks. So organization was definitely something that I fell back on in terms of managing stress. And then in terms of self-care, I definitely turned a lot to exercise and different just ways of moving my body. So again, this is one of the recommendations my therapist had given me, was to even just like 10 minutes in the morning, vigorously like move my body in some way. So I went through kind of a lot of different exercise outlets that I tried. So I do like HIIT workouts in the morning, like a brisk walk, yoga, strength training at the gym. Like I tried a bunch of different things. And I think what helped me was not kind of placing an expectation on myself to do something particular. So I would just wake up and do what I felt like doing, which some days would be something more chill like yoga, other days would be maybe going on like a few mile jog. And so that really kind of helped clear my mind for the day and help me tackle stress kind of throughout this whole process.
I love that so much. And of course, I'm smiling over here as like a yoga instructor. Like, she said yoga, yay! But no, it's so important, especially for your physical and mental health and just listening to your body and your mind. And like, I love that your therapist recommended you to do that. That's just so amazing. And I'm sure it helps so much relieve like stress and you can kind of sweat it all out.
For sure, exactly.
So my next question is, how did you manage to kind of like handle the work and life balance?
Yeah, throughout college as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I had received early on in undergrad was to choose things to fill my schedule that I'm really passionate about. And so not just doing things that I felt like I had to do in order to get into the next step, which for me would be vet school, which you have to do those things, you have to check those boxes, but to also fill my schedule with things that I really enjoy. Because A, it's going to help me not get burnt out as easily. And B, when it actually does come to moving on to that next step, whether that be a job or another uh, institution, like for professional school, your passion, I think, will really shine through when you're talking about these things. And so for me, one of those was tap dancing. So I joined a tap dancing team, and that really gave me an outlet and something for me to look forward to every week. So that was one thing that I did. And then another was choosing to study Japanese on top of biology, which biology kind of checked the boxes for vet school. But then Japanese was kind of my outlet of something that I really enjoyed studying and I could fill my class schedule with. So
Oh,
that was one piece of advice that really helped me kind of manage the work-life balance aspect of it. Another thing I would say that really helped is making sure that I surrounded myself with friends who kind of understood the rigorous schedule and path that I had taken on, and who wouldn't mind, say, like sit at a coffee shop together and do schoolwork as our kind of way of like seeing each other every week. That was one thing that I really enjoyed during college.
oh, I
So
love
just surrounding myself with people that understand kind of what you're going through. And then I did mention exercise has been a kind of huge part of keeping my mind from becoming too clouded by stress. And I've gone through, like I said, different phases of working out and not kind of holding in myself to a certain expectation to stick with one thing, but just doing what feels good.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love that you emphasized on like having friends that don't mind, studying with you as your form of like seeing each other every week. I think that's so important because I
Exactly.
feel like there's so many people that just don't understand. They think you're not like prioritizing the friendship, but you're really just busy and
Mhm.
overwhelmed with schoolwork. So when you can kind of merge both together, I think it's just a beautiful thing and you don't have to miss out on that.
Absolutely. And you can still enjoy each other's company and like being in each other's presence, I think is a really beautiful thing while still getting the things done that you do need to do and kind of alleviate your stress in that way.
Absolutely. So, are there any specific concerns or anxieties that you would like to address regarding your mental health as you transition to your secondary education?
Yeah, I think one thing I've even noticed this even just the past kind of few weeks is I am a very selfless person. You mentioned this in your first podcast, Rylan, and that really resonated with me.
Oh,
And it's super easy, I think, to lose sight of the fact that you still have to take care of yourself in order to give back to people. Like you have to prioritize your needs in order to have that energy and time to give back to other people. And so one thing that I struggle with is kind of that feeling of obligation towards either like hanging out with people or just helping people. And I'll often do that at the expense of myself, which will backfire when I have to kind of condense all of my tasks into like a shorter amount of time. And then you kind of get that like tension building up in your stomach, and uh, it can just become a lot. And so I think that's one thing that I definitely want to work on as like a personal goal moving forward, is managing that feeling of like obligation towards people.
absolutely. I love that you like threw that in there because it's so important. I feel like you can't pour from an empty cup. And at the end of the
That's a
day,
great
we have
way to
to
put
take
it.
care, right, we have to take care of ourselves before we can do anything for others. And for us to do that, we have to make sure our needs are being met. And it's hard for people like us, but we can do it. I believe in us. And it's just so important to spread awareness on that. So I love that you touched on that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know it works well for one person, doesn't work well for another, but have you found any resources or like coping strategies to help with stress? I know you said like reaching out to a counselor is a great option, but were there like any others?
Yeah, so definitely that was a big kind of hurdle that I had to overcome myself, was actually just reaching out. I remember just sitting on a bench and being like, having my phone in my hand and kind of coaching myself up to actually just making the phone call. And that was the biggest, honestly, that was the hardest part, was just like making the phone call to the counseling center on campus. And after that, it was like, there's a whole process in place for you to get matched to someone and get the help that you need. But I think it's really difficult to make that first step, but reminding yourself that you do need to put yourself first, and that these resources are here for a reason and you might as well utilize them. That's kind of the thought process that got me to actually reaching out. So absolutely reaching out to counselors on campus or third-party resources, whatever kind of fits your needs. I would say other resources in terms of coping with stress for me, I mentioned kind of my organization of like tasks into different categories. Another kind of aspect of that, I really enjoy bullet journaling. And so I think for anyone who's not familiar with bullet journaling, basically it's a dot journal. So you have a bunch of dots like in a grid on a page, and it's blank. And so you can create whatever you want with it. So people will do habit trackers or weekly spreads, weekly schedules, a goal page, like and really anything you want. It's very free form. And so I think there's a few kind of benefits to this. One, it can be a huge stress reliever just from like doodling and creating. And two, you can kind of organize your thoughts and your schedule and your life in that sense. And so I really love bullet journaling, and that's kind of an outlet for me personally,
I
which
love
again,
that.
like Rylan said, might not work for everyone, but finding what helps you kind of organize your tasks is really great.
I love that so much, and I've never bullet journaled, so you just inspired me. I'm gonna have to check that out, and
Yeah,
hopefully,
there's tons of resources on Pinterest. You could even just Google Instagrammers, like anything out there. I love finding kind of a page of inspo and then just going off of that. So it's really awesome.
great form of creativity. So
Another thing, do you want me to
no,
add one
no,
more
keep
thing?
going, keep going.
One more thing I just thought of too that has been really important to me is like kind of my nighttime routine. And I guess it's not even necessarily a routine because I don't have something in particular that I do, but I make sure that I have like an hour to myself before I go to bed. I don't just like close my laptop and immediately go to sleep, because I found that that will just keep my mind kind of up and running. And so honestly, it differs every single night. Some nights I'll shower and then read a book for a little while. Some nights I'll bullet journal. Other nights I'll like feel tight and my muscles will be sore. So I might do like a yoga stretch wind down kind of video from YouTube. So it really just depends. But I think the biggest point of this is just to give yourself time before going to bed in order to wind down. Because I think otherwise that stress kind of wound up inside of you can cause you to have a poor like sleep. And then that, at least from my experience, the following day will kind of make me more stressed because I won't be as awake and be as kind of functional as I could be. So setting that time aside for myself has been really important.
I love that so much. Like me time, self-care, all of that before bed, especially, is so important to make sure you wind down and you're just like refreshed and relaxed. Um, so I love that you mentioned that. That's so important. I wouldn't not have even thought to talk about that. So thank you for throwing that in there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, the beauty of it
Yeah.
is that it doesn't have to be like a set routine. I know there's a lot on social media about having a certain like skincare routine and like it's very like rigid and set in stone. And for me personally, I find that it actually adds to my stress because if I don't do one of those things in the steps, then I feel like I failed myself and I haven't like adhered to that rigid routine. And so I personally like having not as set of a schedule. Maybe for some of the listeners, you find that having a set schedule works best for you, and that's great. But just sharing from my personal experience, I like having kind of a more free form nighttime routine.
And I love that because I feel like a nighttime routine isn't like a recipe. Like we don't need to follow it step by step. It's kind of like what works for you. And that's the thing that's going to stick the most. So I love that you said that because I feel like there's a lot of pressure and anxiety, especially with social media and like sleep deprivation, to like follow this perfect skincare nighttime routine regimen that people do. And it's like, should I be sleep deprived or should I do this like 12-step skincare routine
Exactly,
that
exactly.
it's like there's so much overwhelming, concern over that. So I love that you threw that in there because it's so important to make sure you do something before going to bed and you take care of that. So
Yeah, and two, going off of that, and I think at least I found the same thing for kind of waking up in the morning. I don't necessarily have like a set routine that I do when I get up. And I honestly, this might be controversial health-wise, but I don't necessarily have a set time that I get up every morning either. Some mornings I have to be up earlier, some mornings I don't, but I tend to just kind of listen to my body. And if I'm feeling really tired the night before, I'm like, okay, I probably need a bit more sleep. So I'll set my alarm a bit later and give myself that extra time. Some people might like to have the same time every single morning to get up, and that's great too. But I've noticed that if I don't prioritize sleep and making sure that I get my like 7 to 9 hours kind of thing, then I don't function as well. So I make sure to think about that before setting my alarm the next morning.
I love that so much. Okay, so the next question that I have is I have some listeners who are applying to college or are kind of thinking about their secondary education and moving forward to like a different direction. What would you offer them during this time in their life?
Yeah, so I think whether you're applying to like college for an undergraduate degree, or you're eventually going to be applying to some sort of post-secondary education, whether that's like med school, law school, vet school, grad school, PhD, whatever that means for you. I think looking back on my last 4 years, one of the biggest things I would say is to, as much as you can, just try to enjoy the process and the small moments every day. I know that sounds really cliche, but it is so, so true. Even just with walking through campus, now I'm realizing just how beautiful everything is around me. And I really wish that I would have taken that time as I went through my 4 years to appreciate what was all around me instead of just kind of speeding through it, which I think in hindsight is kind of inevitable. Like when you're going through the process, you kind of have that next step that you're always looking to. But it is important to slow down and just kind of observe what's around you and appreciate it. So that's definitely one kind of piece of advice I'd give. Another thing that I'd say, one thing that I wish I would have done is journal as I was going through undergrad. I think because it has a multiple purposes. One, I think it would help like clarify your thoughts or my thoughts as I was going through college a lot and handling difficult situations, whether it was stress or friendship drama or whatever. I think having that kind of outlet to clarify my thoughts would have been really great. It just helps to record your memories, and I think it'd be really awesome to read back on them later. And then third, I guess this is more of like a practical aspect, but if you're applying to secondary school in the future or even a job, chances are you're probably going to have to obviously write a resume, maybe even a personal statement, an interview, obviously. And so I think for all of those, referring to stories or specific instances that you recall can be really powerful. And having that in one spot can really help the application process go a lot smoother. So that's one thing that I would recommend, sure, is journaling.
Yeah, such great advice and so inspiring. I love that you said like look around, because I feel like this generation specifically tends to like look down at our phones and we don't even notice anything around us. And especially college kids, you always like see them, or at least I see them like on their phones, texting with their AirPods in. Like look around and see how beautiful your campus is and just take it in.
For sure.
That you feel
Yeah.
comfortable.
I've recently started making myself put my phone in my backpack while I'm walking. And so I can't look through notifications or scroll on Instagram. And so instead, like I'll put my phone in my backpack and then maybe I'll put music in, maybe I won't. But kind of taking it out of my hands really helps kind of be more present in the moment.
I love that. That's so important. So my last question is no pressure, but what is one thing you wish you could have told your younger self before applying to college?
Yeah. So I think for undergrad, I guess I'll answer this in two separate portions. So for undergrad, I think I would have told myself to be maybe a bit less farsighted. So when I say farsighted, I mean that when I was applying to undergrad, I knew I was going to be a vet and that like going to undergrad was just kind of the first step. So it didn't much matter to me where I went to undergrad. And so I was just kind of like flying through the process. Like I applied and then I chose the University of Florida here just because I was offered a good chunk of scholarship money. And so it was just kind of the natural choice to make. And so I think I kind of just flew through the process and didn't really put much thought into it. That's not to say that it got me to where I am today and I'm very grateful for it, but I think just kind of slowing down and appreciating the decisions that I was making a bit more would have been one thing that I would have liked to do as an applicant to undergrad. And then in terms of vet school, during the application, that was a whole different hurdle to jump over. But I think going back to the idea of imposter syndrome in that, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would tell myself is to trust that what I was doing would pay off in the long run. So each activity that I took on, each role had a purpose and that it would add and pay off in the long run when I applied to vet school. And so I think the application process itself had really forced me to reflect on what I value and how each experience was contributing to the person that I was becoming. And I wish that I would have kind of trusted the whole process as I was going through undergrad in order to kind of alleviate that self-doubt a bit more.
I love that so much, and that's so beautiful. And I know younger Claire is so proud of you, and I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much for sharing your
Oh, Rylan, of course.
and you inspire me. I look up to you so much, and I'm so glad that the world can hear your story because it's such a beautiful one. And I'm so proud of you. Again, I'm going to emphasize that. So thank you
Oh,
so much.
yes, of course, Rylan. I look up to you so much too, even though you're younger than me,
So,
which I think says a lot of your accomplishments in that. So,
oh, you're so sweet. I'm going to cry now. Okay.
oh,
You're so sweet. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, with love, Rye. If you or someone you know has a story that they would like to share, feel free to reach out to me at recipesbyry@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and if you or someone you love is struggling with mental health, reach out to the number 988 because help is always out there. And as always, with love, Rye. Mwah.